Welcome to the Audiobook Lovin Series, a month-long event celebrating the authors and narrators that bring romance stories to life. Listen along as Viviana, Enchantress of Books, interviews your favorite writers and voices, share special guest posts, and stay tuned for some special information at the conclusion of the episode.
Hi everyone, today I have the pleasure of chatting with authors and narrators voicing the heroes and heroines of Man of War. Author TJ London and her narrators Nicholas Boulton, Kathryn Vinclaire, and Jason Clarke. Welcome back, Jason and TJ, and warm welcome to Nicholas and Kathryn to the Audiobook Lovin Series.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hello.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun chat with multiple voices, but we also know how romance loves are multiple, so we're good. Why don't we start by having you guys tell us how you guys got into narrating, how long you've been narrating, a little bit about yourselves, and who you're voicing in Man of War. You want to start, Nicholas?
You bet. Hi, I'm Nicholas Boulton. I'm voicing Merrick, also known as Dale McKesson, to some people, and I hope I'm not giving any spoilers there. I think that's been
No spoilers, you're good.
And I've been narrating audiobook for, I think, something like 15 years now, but my voice work goes way, way back. I started in the early 1990s, back in the last century, working with
So long
BBC
ago.
Radio, working with the BBC Radio Drama Company. So it was quite a kind of a comfortable leap from doing radio drama and also doing short stories for the BBC to narrating unabridged books of various different genres. And that's how long I've been going. It feels a lot longer.
And Kathryn?
Wow, gosh, my experience dwarf in comparison to Nicholas's. I'm Kathryn Vinclaire. I've been narrating audiobook for about 3 years now, and my voiceover work has been for a similar amount of time. It's a mix of commercials, video games, audiobooks, audio dramas. I'm voicing Caroline/India. Hope that's not too much of a spoiler too.
No, not at all. We're going to spoil a few things. There's a preface before this that, just FYI, there may be a few spoils, so you're good.
Yeah. Jason, your turn.
Yeah, I'm Jason Clarke. I play Clayton Carlisle, George Gates, George Allen, and a little bit, sometimes Jamie, the little boy, and a few other characters, but mostly Clayton. And I got started in narration after being an actor in New York for about 4 years, some stage stuff in the city and around the country. And then I did some commercial VO work, and I always really loved doing voiceover. I did my first audiobook. It was like a little over 7 years ago, actually, back in 2015. But it wasn't until about 2018 that I started like actually doing it full time. Before then, it had been like every couple of months I'd do a book or a commercial, but now it's become my full-time thing, and I love it. So yeah, I'm really happy to be doing this, and I'm happy to be here and be a part of this project.
So I'm TJ London, obviously. I am not an author by trade. It's my second hustle, basically, like I have a real one. But I got into writing as part of therapy. So I had a really, as I've talked about and been very transparent about, I had a really catastrophic event. 2 of them happened in my life at the same time, and went into counseling and had some very serious personal issues. And initially, my counselor wanted me to start journaling what was going on in my life to try to help me cope. Unfortunately, that did not go really well. It was actually kind of exacerbating some of the problems that I was having. So she's like, do you have any creative outlets? Like, do you paint? Do you do something to help you deal with your anxiety? And I'm like, all I do is research. That's part of what I do in my profession. I said, and I know I used to have some book ideas. I used to write and stuff. She's like, okay, we're going to go down that road. We're going to try this. So I actually started writing, and I would write pages and I would bring them into my counselor and read them to her. And she would dig through what I was talking about and say, okay, why is this happening, or why is this happening? And that was actually the start of my writing career. And the Tory, which is actually the first book in the saga, was actually literally the production of my counseling. And so Man of War comes the same way. It's also part of counseling. The time I wrote Man of War, my father had passed away. And that was part of what was going on in my life at the time. And he passed away kind of tragically. I mean, every death is tragic, but it was pretty unique. And usually where families start to come together, when you lose such an important person in your family, my family really kind of fell apart. And there was a lot of sibling rivalry that was really exposed. There was a lot of dysfunction in levels of my family. And so I wrote Man of War in this counseling process. I would read pages of it to my counselor, and we would talk about where these characters come from. So Secret to All of You, all of them are manifestations, a little bit of what I was going through, kind of steeped in the fiction of the story. I know Kathryn and I have talked about that. There is a reason Dane is the third child. I am a third child. There is a reason Dane is the third child. My father is the third child. You know, there is a reason that the oldest sibling is the one in debate with the character. I had an oldest sibling. My father had an oldest sibling. So that's a little bit about how I got started. And then I never intended to actually publish. That was never the plan. It was always just about, you know, creating the books. And what ended up happening was my counselor's like, okay, now you need to go do something. Let someone read this. I'm like, you know, no one's supposed to read this. But eventually I did let someone read it and they liked it, and which was disturbing to me. But I was like, okay, somebody likes this. So it eventually ended up, the story got put out to the world, and then I just kept progressing through it. And literally every book I write now, I still write part of counseling. So it's, for me, and because it's Mental Health Month, I do want to draw attention to that. That writing is a really good option for people who are struggling through mental health issues. It's kind of been my way of dealing with my ongoing mental health struggles. So I just want to put that plug out there and give you guys some backdrop for understanding Man of War a little bit. So I'll let you go back. I'll go back to you, Viv.
No, thank you for sharing. And we're really glad that you decided to listen to the therapist as far as getting these published, because they are great stories. And I think that other people will also kind of see some things that might be going along in their life and how, you know, that it might help them. So that's good. As I mentioned before, TJ and Jason have been a guest in the past, so we will be including those links in the main post so you guys can check those out, because there's a lot of other fun stuff going on in those conversations from previous years. Now, something that TJ does that I find extremely interesting, and I really hope that other authors will start doing this more with their narrators, is provide a lot of details on the characters, giving them guidance on the tones and the voices and the cadences of the characters. As the narrators, how did you land on the final voices and tones for these individual characters? Nicholas?
I mean, as you say, the notes that TJ gives are absolutely indispensable. They're so useful for any actor to get in touch with the characters that they're going to portray. Of course, you know, when you're voicing one of the main characters in the book, and you know, I do a lot of other books. For example, I do all the character voices, for example, in Dickens' books and Wilkie Collins's books, and that requires a great deal of kind of setting where each character sits. But of course, when you're voicing predominantly one hero, it's a lot easier. The job's a lot easier. You just you find that position in yourself, keep it quite close to yourself, your own center, and apply it to the character. And you know, with any luck, they meet like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle.
So no control freak on me. You didn't mind. I always worry when I send notes to somebody. I'm always like, oh, they're going to think TJ's a big control freak. But it's more like, it's kind of my thoughts of like, hey, this is my thoughts, you know, just go with them and create, you know, and take what you will with it from them.
Which is hugely useful, as I say, for any actor, because it just gives you a direction in which you can go. And then, of course, within the boundaries of that direction, you can make your own choices and bring what you bring, your own unique qualities to the work.
Kathryn?
Wow. I mean, Caroline, similar to what Nicholas has just said, really, you find a voice that sits quite close to your own. There's not a huge difference between how I sound and how Caroline sounds. But the thing is she finds a new strength and a new sense of persona within herself during this whole Man of War experience that she goes through. So for Caroline, it was very much about finding the moments where she was a little more petulant, where she would put on the formality, or when she was sinking back into former habits and her voice would be a little more formal, versus the moments where she just let loose and she'd find a freedom within herself, and she'd lose the RP for a minute. Not to the point where she sounds like a completely different person, but just there's a subtle change in accent, just in a few moments, depending on who she's speaking to and how she's feeling in that moment. Certainly sort of towards the end of the book, she starts to find a confidence within herself that I wanted to show in the book. So it was more to do with subtle changes in accent where the scene dictated it, really, while still staying true to who she is at the end of the day.
I think it's interesting because I've had a chance to actually listen to the start of it, like the first, maybe about a third of the book. And you say it's subtle change, but it's so impactful. it's so impactful when you listen to it, even though it's just the fragility in one scene and the strength in another. It's just, it creates such a dichotomy of the character, which is what I was trying to create on the page, that you did such a brilliant job with that. So I think you're being modest.
Oh, well, thank you so much, TJ. She is a character of great polarizing contrasts. And my concern was that she'd end up sounding like a different person completely in different scenes. And whilst I want to show a complete change in emotion, I also want people to be certain that it's her in every moment. It's just that she has such contrast. So that was a really fun thing to play with. And yeah, TJ, all of your notes and our discussions before I started recording were all just so beneficial in making sure we could keep that authenticity running through her.
Thank you.
Jason?
Yeah, so with Clayton, I feel like he is the hero of his own story, kind of. He shows up and he's got his own agendas, he's got his own motives, and at the same time he's sort of like, I can do this for you, you can do this for me, let's work together. So my goal with him was to sort of infiltrate the story and be this confident person, not trying to impress other people, but being a good cooperator, I suppose. And yeah, he's got a lot of fun moments. He has a bit of like a roguish tilt to him, which is a blast. Like I don't know. There was sort of like a James Bond approach, a little bit like secret agent kind of thing. But then at the same time, he's got a bit of a sense of humor about him.
He ends up being the accomplice to Caroline, actually, and a really good scene in the book too.
Yeah.
He is meant to be very roguish. I'm going to just interject here for a second. So he is basically the prequel character, the uncle of the main character of the saga, right? Of John Carlyle.
Yeah.
So he's really supposed to set the stage for the fact that this character is eventually, so John Carlyle is a spy in the British Army, right? So he's really that preface to him. Where does, that's in his genes, right? It came through his family. So we're supposed to almost get that sense of what's later to come in the series through him. And so I thought that was really interesting that you said that, because that's exactly was the goal. And I know he's not a primary character, but he's such a pivotal one in the story. So
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, he shows up and he really takes command, and it creates like a really surprising dynamic throughout the main flow of the story of the main characters. But and then with like characters like Gates, I mean that one I really slipped into pretty easily. He's very he has a very strong sense of duty and loyalty, and at the same time he's very protective of India, Caroline, when he interacts with her. But yeah, he has massive respect for Merrick. He's always there to do the right thing, and I loved that role. I love playing that kind of guy.
So that's funny too. So I'm going to full disclosure here. So Lieutenant Gates is my husband.
Oh, nice.
So I wrote this book as a 20-year anniversary present to my husband. It was like, because he had gone through me through the whole counseling experience. He had been by my side through some really, really bad times. So it was my way of giving a gift back to him. And my husband very meticulously teaches me everything. Like, so the scene where he's teaching India how to use the weapon, the pistol, right? It's very specific. And that's how my husband, when he's teaching me to do something, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And he's very, specific and stuff. I went at that character always how my husband. And essentially we know he meets a woman later in the story. We kind of see a little romance brew for him there, and she's supposed to be me. And she actually becomes India's accomplice in later in the story. She meets her and she happens to have almost no hair essentially. And I did that purposely for people who know me to know that was me as a character. But it was because people always ask me, they're like, are you ever in your books? I'm like, I'm everywhere. But if you want me to specifically be me, I can do that too. So so you got to narrate my husband. So it was funny when we were doing when we were casting him, they're like, who do you want to do your husband in this book? I'm like, I don't know, Jason Clarke. All right.
Oh, nice. Well, it's an honor.
If you had to choose, girl, you did well.
I know. I was like, who do I want to narrate my husband? So there you go. Full disclosure there.
Thank you. Oh, that's great.
I was going to say, I really love that you guys were really happy with getting those notes and directions. Again, I think it's something that authors are now becoming to be a bit more involved in the process of the audiobooks, and providing you guys with that guidance may be looked at by some, TJ, as quote unquote control freak, but I see it as providing the actor with as much information because they don't know this. It's not like they're portraying someone that's been portrayed before, or someone that they know that this certain kind of mannerisms or this kind of a thing. So, being provided with that is such a gift, I think, to the actors. I rather know what I'm looking and walking into, and then still be provided with that freedom to make it pretty, and I think that that's what you guys do. You're provided with the guidelines, and then you make it your own based on the stuff. So I just wanted to kind of get on that page.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to say just a couple of things, because I neglected to say specifically about voicing Merrick. I was just talking about the actors process. So just picking up on what you were saying, TJ, it's funny that you mentioned you're the third child. So am I. So I could feel it. I feel a kind of a kinship there. And Merrick is someone who's living under an assumed name and has had his captaincy thrust upon him. He's living up to all these expectations and also trying to clear his family's name. So for me, I had a lovely way of keying into his insecurities as well as his strengths that sort of gave him a vulnerability. I think that's what I should have said earlier on anyway.
For as strong as he is, though, he's incredibly, he's so formed, but yet he's got so many insecurities as a character. He's forced to be a captain, but yet there's those moments of like, oh my gosh, I'm a captain now. Like, I'm in charge of all these people. You know what I mean? There's 400 men on this ship and they're all under me, and he's got so much going on. And it kind of rivals that situation of being the youngest child, sometimes the most like underestimated, or the baby of a family where people don't really expect much of you, that you're just gonna like, and so tell
me about it.
Well, and that was me and my family as the youngest. They're like, is she going to do anything besides boys and clothes when she grows up? And here I went into this very responsible role in medicine that I did. And so, you still go through those moments of, I'm still the baby in my family, and no one trusts my advice when I give it. I'm like, hello, but I'm always that person. Nobody takes my advice.
Yeah, no, speaking of ships, I'm going to let you drive, TJ, for the rest of these questions. So your show.
I do want to add in one thing about the notes. So one of the things I did was say, and I'm sure if you guys read those notes, I think you did, I said play to the second balcony. And I'm sure Nicholas as an actor, and Jason and Kathryn as actors, when you see someone say play to the second balcony, you're like, oh really, shall I?
I was thinking of getting a tattoo of NKU, which means never knowingly underplayed.
Exactly. Well, and
it's a maxim I live by.
Well, and here's the thing that I loved about that. I really wanted you guys to for me, it's a movie in my ears. Like, I want my books to sound like someone is sitting in the theater but it's just being talked out for them, or like a 1920s radio show or 30s radio show where everything's really becoming for the character. So as I get to listen to you guys, I get to hear that kind of like, we're in the theater, that the curtain's gone up and we have this amazing thing playing out for us. So that was really kind of my goal of those notes. So thank you for not thinking me a control freak. Because I really, when I write them out, I go through that moment of like, don't say too much. Don't say too much.
Yeah, I think it's part of the imposter syndrome. And as well, I know we've talked about in the past, just the fact that letting go, and also the fact that we're women sometimes when we're looked at, unfortunately, as the control freak when we're providing leadership. And for men, it's like, oh, he's such a good leader. And I'm going, hello. But yeah, so I just wanted to make, kind of have that conversation and to let other authors know that they can do this. And you're helping the actors, but also providing them with a better opportunity to get the character. So
Absolutely. Just to add to that as well, just from the actor's perspective, not only is it efficient to have notes from whoever is taking a creative ownership of some of the interpretation of the character, as actors, we're also very mindful of how personal these manuscripts are to the authors. It's not just a job. We're aware that we're taking your baby and we are giving it a life in a different context, in a way that might not be the first thing that you would think of for that character. So we need to know that the direction that we want to take that character and take that interpretation is in line with how you've envisaged it and what you want for your project as well, because we are just small cogs in the great machine of this whole production, which has been so clearly steered by TJ and by any author in this position.
It's interesting that you say that. So I brought this up on the Villains podcast, but I think it's really important to say it. Because I write in counseling, I really struggle with separation anxiety, with handing my manuscripts, my characters over to individuals. And every author's journey is very, very different in how they feel. Some people, it's like, go interpret, do whatever you want with it. And then there are people like me who it's like, I really need to feel this trust with the people that I hand them over to, because they're really interpreting. I mean, in every author, it's a layer of them, but for me, it's very personal because it's steeped in my own mental health and my own writing, my own personal struggles. So it's really nice to, like, you know, hear that people are like, okay, you know, this is great. But also it's great to see what you find in the characters, what you deliver. Like when, you know, Jason does some of his dialogues and I listen to him, I'm like, you know, I didn't hear it that way, but that's really amazing where he finds humor and where it comes through in his voice, or when Nicholas comes through in a different way or provides some of his own feedback. It's like, I didn't look at it that way. So I learn a lot through you guys, and in that trust between myself, the production company, and you guys is really key for me, because it helps me feel that, like, okay, that connectedness, not only to the story, but that connectedness to you and to the characters, and making it all like really come through for the listener. Because like I said, my goal ultimately, why else hire a cast of, you know, 9 people? I could hire one person, which would be brilliant too. But I'm trying to bring a lot of people in to give like this total experience to the whole story as well. So that's just some of my, like, kind of my thoughts around the whole production and everything too. So I get to ask you questions now. Yay! And by at any point, you guys can interrupt me and ask me questions. You can throw it back at me. That's always fair. Anything's free game. There's no holds bar. You guys can ask me anything you want, even about the CD hotel I'm in. So you guys are heroes. So this is the friendly team on this call. We had villains last week, and they were very naughty in that call too. So what's the best about portraying a hero or a heroine? We'll start with Nicholas, or this hero specifically.
Well, I mean, you know, if you aim for just the good stuff, it can be very boring. The great thing is that all the characters are flawed. So you play to their flaws and kind of mix that with their strengths, and you've got something that's a little more real, I suppose, more interesting, psychologically speaking, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, Merrick's great fun. You know, he's got all of his hang-ups and his issues and all the rest of it, and he meets this amazing person who kind of unlocks him. That's great fun.
Kathryn.
Well, you know, this is one of the first heroes I've ever played.
Yeah,
I'm
I remember you telling me that.
always cast as the villain. So it's so refreshing and a little intimidating to suddenly be in this slightly unfamiliar territory for me, because it's always just be as evil as you can. And with this, it's the opposite. Find the purity, find the innocence. Exactly. Find the sweetness. I mean, India is such a complex character that for her, it wasn't so much a case of playing the good person or the bad person. It's just being true to how she's feeling in that moment. She's not especially guided by hugely strong morals, I don't think. I believe it's just that she's in a position where she just wants to protect herself. But when she finds that strength within herself towards the second half of the book, she begins to take some moral responsibility, I think, for more of her actions. And she starts to make decisions based on the fact that she sees herself fully as one of the good guys. And it's very nice to see her step into that role. So I feel like becoming the heroine was something that India took as a journey upon herself within this production, pretty much the same as I did.
You know, what's interesting about her too is she's kind of the more corrupt of the two. I mean, Merrick is very much a very good hero, right? Like, we know there are sides of him that are, you know, that he struggles with, right? But he really is very heroic. She's kind of the little bit on the wild side, you know what I mean? And we actually will see her that way later in the series. So, you know, and the fun thing about Merrick and her is he's always a step behind her, kind of. Like, he's always kind of missing things. Like, she's off doing something, and he's like, he doesn't maybe even know it happened. You know,
he kind of comes in with preconceived ideas about her and has them all knocked out of the park.
Exactly. Yeah. And at one point, she even sneaks into the Hellfire Club, and he's there, and he totally misses it. And she comes back to the hotel. All this has happened, and you know, we don't see, you know, and he's just kind of like, oh, she's sleeping. She stayed here overnight, you know, and we know that this.
If he only knew.
Right, with Clayton Carlisle, Jason's character. getting into trouble basically. So, but she's kind of the oxymoron. All my total titles are always purposefully kind of deceptive. Well, it says man of war, right? We think of the ship, we think of Merrick, but it's actually a bit woman of war. It's a little bit about like India's battle, a woman's battle in this time period, and how she survives and what she has to do. And one of the things when I created that character was our foremothers are often, we don't hear their stories, but we know they happened and we know women were victim of war. So what would that have, what could it have looked like, through a modern lens, looking at an old time period a little bit. And she really, kind of is, a pirate isn't, no offense to Johnny Depp, but it's not that character. A real pirate is not a nice guy, right? And they're not gonna, women were a casualty sometimes in these situations. So she's really, kind of learning how to survive in this, man's world. And so she's really, the title is both, should be Man of War and technically Woman of War, because it's really both of their stories. Merrick is very formed, yet he's learning. And she's really kind of coming into her own through the story. So, but on her own, he's not making it happen for her. She's kind of doing it, on her own. And which is what I loved about both of you guys together. You haven't heard yourselves together too much yet, but I hear like both of the journeys contrasting yet coming together, so yeah. And Jason, you're not to be forgotten there.
Oh, nice.
So what do you do lots of heroes. I know you do. And you do lots of bad guys too. So just what are your thoughts about heroes and playing those roles? And
Oh yeah, I could talk about this stuff for a while, but when it comes to audiobooks, I play a lot of heroes, but I actually, similarity to Kathryn, I played a lot of villains in like stage and whenever I was like doing on-screen stuff. I think that's just what casting people saw me as. Maybe it was, I don't know, something in the way I performed, but I played a lot of villains. And the thing is I love heroes. Heroes are my favorite characters in any story. I'm kind of a big nerd. Like I love like the more good that's in them, the better. Like the more admirable a person, the more I'm like, yeah, I love that character, So getting the opportunity to play heroes is always a happy time for me, because I think heroes differentiate themselves because they want to stand up and do right by those they love, and they're put into scenarios where they have to take the hard road. They have to face challenges in order to protect those they love. They're not after their own goal. They're not doing things solely out of their own gratification. So I think that's interesting. And it creates, like what Nicholas was saying, it reveals flaws in these characters because maybe it highlights their weaknesses if they fail, if they're facing all these challenges. And I don't know, it adds a lot of interesting dynamic to playing heroes. So I've had a great time with that. Specifically with Gates, he's so diligently loyal and believes so wholeheartedly in this chain of command, in the systems that he's part of, because especially when I'm playing anyone who is military background, sort of the idea behind all that is that if we don't have these systems in place, then we don't really have anything. If we don't do good for the sake of doing good, if we don't, stay true to our duty, then everything will just fall apart. And I think with Gates, that's highlighted in a lot of his interactions. And I love doing that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Well, and that character is nice because he's the captain, he's the lieutenant of the Marines, right? He's the head of the Marines essentially.
Yeah.
And most people so this time period is 1755. It's actually the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, and it's the beginning of it. So, most people don't know a lot about military history. Just to give some nuances here, on a man of war, or would be a ship of the line, they not only have the sailors, but they have the Marines, right? They're the bodyguards, are the ones who would, protect also and fight, right? Because these were fighting ships. So his character is the captain, would be, now we would call him the captain of the Marines, but at the time in 1755, it was a lieutenant because he served under Merrick. So he would have technically been his bodyguard. So he's got that very important position, like wherever Merrick goes, he goes. And we know Merrick as a character comes into the story not originally as the captain. So he has the tendencies of an officer below his station. He tends to forget sometimes his job is now it's to stay put, and now it's to, to run the ship, as opposed to being the first lieutenant who's maybe more active amongst the crew. So he's got a really interesting role. He has to be the total protector, but he also kind of extrapolates that to India now too. He takes responsibility for really everybody on the ship as a character. So you get to be that protective hero per se in this story.
Yeah, I did have a question for you,
Yeah,
TJ.
yeah.
You mentioned that part of your job is research, and
Mhm.
when you began writing, was there sort of like the question of, well, what did you want to research, or what brought you to this kind of topic, this point in history? What made you want to write fiction in that?
Well, so there's two components to this. There's the Revolutionary War component and then the French and Indian War component, or 7 Years' War, however you want to call it.
Hmm.
So the Revolutionary War component really goes back to when I was, and this is, I always feel so embarrassed when I say this, but I love the hair and the look of the Revolutionary War and the styles and the clothing. And that was something is just very romantic and very beautiful. And as a young girl, when I was like 5 and 6, I saw a show. Now if you watch it, it's terribly dated, but it was called The Bastard by John Jakes, and they did this television show. I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up with the big sweeping TV sagas and stuff,
Hmm.
and I saw the clothing and the look of the time and fell really in love with that look. And I was a very young girl, and then my father, seeing that kind of interest in me, took me to Colonial Williamsburg, which is obviously in the U.S. and it's really reminiscent of, and it is a revolutionary town. And I just fell in love with the look of the time period, and just it became like an obsession with me from when I was a young girl, to reading about it, falling in love with it, wanting to know everything about it, right? So when it came to Man of War, to take this direction back, I had to tell the story of their predecessors, right? Because this is basically the prequel, right? It's taking us into that saga, explaining the background. But the truth is, Man of War was written first, actually. Well, technically, the idea was first. So I told you, I always had ideas to write, though I didn't write. About 20 years ago, when I was in school, I had this idea for a sea battle and this story about this hero, and he had red hair. And I confess, I loved Toby Stephens, the actor, and he was in a movie called Cambridge Spies. And I saw him and thought, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's brilliant. He's going to be huge someday. And he really became the idea for Captain Merrick. Flash forward later, he did Black Sails, which is a total coincidence. He just was this idea for Merrick and everything, and then never touched the story again. Well, it came to needing to tell the backstory to the Rebels and Redcoat saga. I said, okay, I need to go back 20 years. What was going on 20 years before this? Well, the French and Indian War was starting, or the 7 Years' War. Okay, where did it start? Now, I could have done it as a land battle, but I was like, well, why would I do it as a land battle when I can do it as a sea battle? Because that's really where it got started. So, but when you do the Royal Navy, you have to know it, and you have to know it well. I mean, like, you can't mess that up in any which way, shape, or form. But what most people know about the Royal Navy, they know from either now or from Nelson's time. And while some things are similar, there's a lot that isn't. So I actually had to go back and research 1755. And then I ended up buying theses from people who wrote about that time period. I bought books, I bought, resources. I probably read about 100 books, and I'm not kidding, about the Royal Navy. Actually went to Portsmouth. I know one of the historians for the Royal Navy. I actually toured the Victory. I mean, I read books about just the language to get it right, and I fell in love with it. I actually, through doing this research, it became my second passion behind doing the Revolutionary War. So I know that's a long answer to you, Jason, but it was not a straight line. The love was really the American Revolutionary War. It was kind of a parallel line depending on where the story went. So
Yeah, it was a broad question. So yeah, no, I'm happy. Thanks
It's great to hear you're inspired by Toby Stephens. He's a good friend of mine. I was just working with him a couple of weeks ago.
The funny thing about that, so do you know how weird that was for me that you posted that, and like literally I tweeted Danielle. I'm like, Danielle, I just had the weirdest serendipity in the world. I'm like, the voice of my Merrick is acting with the muse of my Merrick. But I mean, I liked him way back. He did Cambridge Spies, which was just, that was really, I think, earlier on in his BBC career, that part of it. And I was just like, this man is just brilliant, right? And like, he so inspired me, just his performance and how he moved and everything. And I was like, boy, but no, I could see him as a sea captain on the ocean. And then of course, later he did Black Sails, right? But he's always been in my mind. And so I had this weird kind of moment of like, whoa. So
the funny thing was, when I was talking with him a few weeks ago, I was mentioning this book, and I had no clue, he had no clue that he's playing the main character.
God. So you guys, I've now officially had a moment, like, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy and kind of cool for me too, but But it's even cooler to have my hero and heroine and my other hero here on this call. So this is amazing. So thank you. I have another question. So I gave you guys some hard scenes. Merrick's got a lot of, I mean, all of you guys have hard scenes. And I understand it's hard to not give some things away here, but you're welcome to give a little bit away here. So what do you feel like you struggled with? And it didn't necessarily have to be a hard scene, but what did you struggle with most in one of your narrations of Merrick, or when you were working with them?
What did we struggle with? I mean, there was no real struggle. The way it's written, it just, it leads you through it. Beautiful. For me, I suppose on a technical issue was just trying to imagine what all these incredible naval commands I was giving were, what they actually meant. You know what I mean?
Well, you did such a brilliant job.
Because it's so authentic. It's real, and that you've done the research. I wish I could bring up a few of those incredible naval phrases. They're so great. It tastes fantastic when you're delivering them.
Well, and you did such a brilliant job. It was funny because I was just texting Danielle the other day. I'm like, he does this lingo flawlessly, even the way you say, like,
I'm an army brat. My dad was in the army, so I know how to give orders.
Nice.
But it was, there's some hard words, like all of you had to say them. There's bosun and coxswain, and I'm like away aloft, and like I'm giving you all this language. And you can't do a Royal Navy book, especially from this time period, if you're not really giving the language correctly. Because it sets the stage for the story. So one of my biggest fears was, am I going to have to give like everybody a glossary and how to say everything? And I'm listening to Julie. I'm like, oh, he's got this down. Like he must have been like he must be a sailor, or he's just, well, you're a great actor. But you really like it never like sounded like this wasn't your language. Like you're second, like you knew this. You fooled us well.
I got away with it. Great.
Well, and there just is a lot of them. And that was one of the struggles of creating this book. I was like, oh my God, I have to get the language right, because if you don't, if I give you like, granted, not all my language, because we're not telling the story in the time period voice. Like we understand that. This is a historical piece. You do the best that you can, but sailor language, you can't get wrong.
It's true. And I think what's really nice is that from a listener's point of view, whether you understand the naval jargon or not, it gives you real color, and it makes it feel like you're there. You can smell the sea, you can smell the ropes, the tarry ropes and stuff. It's fantastic. So you don't need to understand all the terminology, but to hear it spoken is really refreshing.
Yeah, and it's like stay low as you go, and all these like different. When you think about what it means, it makes sense. But if you're going under a ship deck, it's so low. You've got to. How I did that. I read so many books about it, but it's interesting. Like if you watch Master and Commander, that's an amazing movie. They do a brilliant job of it there. Obviously, those books are incredible, and there's a lot of jargon there. But there are dictionaries actually on sailor language. So you do a ton of reading. I talked to a lot of people who this is what they did for, who they just understood it. Some scholarly people who helped me with it. And some of it, you do the best you can and you try to be as accurate as you can, but you always worry when you hand it over to somebody. Like I have a lot of Oneida words in my other books. And we met with someone from the Oneida Nation to help us translate those words and how to say those. But, the minute you hand them over to a narrator, you're always like, ooh, have fun with those, right? So yeah, thank you. Like I said, it was amazing when I was listening to it. I'm like, go, Nicholas. So Kathryn, I'm going to turn it over to you. So you had a lot of hard scenes in this story.
A lot of hard scenes. It was just a roller coaster. Honestly, the challenge of this role didn't come so much from technical language. It came more from the sheer intensity of so many of these scenes. Poor Caroline goes through so much. It's not like there's one pivotal scene where something horrific happens and she has a bit of fallout from it a couple scenes later, and then it's back to a more basic narrative just to progress the storyline along. It's like almost every scene that she's in, she's got some sort of turmoil, some sort of struggle, or something truly horrific happens to her. And it happens a lot. I remember when I did her ages ago, first doing the audition for this role. And I remember saying to a couple of voiceover friends of mine after I'd done the audition, I said, listen, I've just done this audition and I'm not sure if I went overboard. I'm not sure if I gave too much in that audition. But in the audition piece, she's trapped in a sinking vessel. She's going to drown if she doesn't get someone's attention. And she's terrified. and she has so much to explain to the complete stranger who comes to her aid that it's just complete intensity. And I think it's very telling that what I thought might have been too much was actually just enough to get me the role, because it is that level of intensity and that level of extremity of scene and of emotion that I think really makes her, because she isn't a woman that's there to be restrained. She's a woman that's there to throw hell to the wind and express how she's feeling, because she finds that strength within herself.
I think about your audition because I remember when Jacqueline Protho was the casting director for this. We all know Jack. Hey, Jack. And so she directed me. We were looking for the right India, Caroline, and I gave her this list of all these things I need. Okay, I need her to do this, 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 and this. And she's like, I got her. I gotcha. I know the gal. And so she sent me your audition and she's like, okay, Trace, I can't wait to hear what you think. Right. And so I went, when I listen, like I said, for me, listening to characters is very personal. Like I almost have to go like in a private place in my own room. Usually I get very emotional when I listen to them. I frequently end up crying. I'm a big baby, I admit it. But I was listening to her and I was just like, I believe it. She's stuck in a hold. She's chained to the wall, and this is the end of her life. Like that's how she comes into this story. This woman comes in bare at the bottom, and it's her rise up. Basically, it's her resurrection. It's her phoenix, in this story. So when I listened to it, I was like, yeah. And Jack was like, what do you think? Should we any direction? I'm like, she knows, she understands this character already from the get-go. So think of it as being kind of overdoing it, but you also don't know me and you don't know, like, I love when people overdo it. So it makes it really, really easy now that but now actually I give note in auditions because to try to facilitate people and say, hey, listen, this is what I'm looking for so that, I can really help people. But you guys I didn't have to give you guys any notes. You were all so good and you kind of figured it out on your own. So, because I remember Nicholas's audition too. I wasn't even really, you just read something and I got it on my phone. Jack's like, oh my God, you got to hear this. And she sent it to me. I'm like, well, I guess we don't need any more auditions. I'm like, it's, it's kind of a done deal. And then, Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you. You didn't have a lot of perspective, but you had a ton of characters in the story,
Yeah. My characters sort of pop in here and there. And I didn't have too many things to struggle with. I will say, I think just by nature of, my stuff being wild dialogue, and this is sort of spoilery, but there are characters I voice who get injured or engage in combat. And I think diving into those scenes after, maybe the last scene I voiced as that character was a very sort of placid, quiet scene. It's sort of like getting shot out of a cannon. So needing to like build up to that and sort of self-generate in order to reach where they needed to be in this climactic moment of their lives. That was a bit of a struggle, but it's just actor stuff, I guess. Yeah, that's pretty much all.
Well, and so Jason, he's got a military character. He has Clayton Carlisle, so he's kind of all over the place a lot. And it's fun because you show up as like little gemstones in the middle of the book everywhere. I'm like, oh, there's Jason, as I'm listening to it. But then it's kind of that with James and everybody we hear in different spots. But Jason, I remember, so you auditioned for something else, so full disclosure to everybody, once you join my cast, I keep you. You don't get to disappear. Like I bring you in and you become part of my family. I collect you all because Nicholas has already been in one of my books previously. And that character is ongoing because it's a saga, right? So everybody comes back. But Jason, it was funny because everyone at AudioFlow was like, we got to work with you got to work with him. You got to work with him. And I had heard a lot of your stuff before, but I was like, I got to find that right spot for him. And the funny thing is I believe this is your first historical.
Yeah, no, definitely. Nothing in this time period at all.
So we brought you to the dark side.
No, I love it. I love it. Yeah. Happy
and
to
it
be
was fun because I was like, yeah, I get to tell people he's in history now. So, because you do so much, but I had heard you for another character, which, full disclosure, we're hopefully going to see Jason again in another book as a different character as well. But his audition I was just like, which voice is his real voice? Like I heard you do a couple different voices in it. And then you did a book called Sinners, which I commonly made a statement about. Danielle Lansrada wrote it. And you do like all these different voices in it. I'm like, are these all Jason? So he does he's so good at like masking and disguising and doing chameleon with his voice that like there are times when I'm listening to to Man of War and I'm like, is that Jason? No, that's not him. That's somebody else. So that was one of the things I loved when you did your audition is you could do so many different voices. So I could put you like in so many amazing places And it's like little gemstones that like show up in the middle of the story. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's I could make jokes about me not having a personality at all, and I just sort of make up voices. But yeah, it's a blast to get to play different characters and just sort of pop up and be like, okay, who's this? Who's this guy? And then, I'll have one chapter where it's just Jamie being like, Mama, like little British boy. And I'm just like, oh, that didn't work. I'll try that again.
Jason does a great job for kid voices, that's for sure.
So that was the debate, because we have two children in this story. We have Kent, who you guys know very, very well. And then we also have Jamie, who's a very important character, actually. He's the son of James McKesson, but he's the older brother of Alexi McKesson, who is our hero of the next 3 books that I'm writing. So The Rebel is due to come out, and that will actually come out in audio next year. And then there's The Rebel, The Raider, and The Renegade. So those are 3 more books that go in the saga, actually. So yeah, these are the little boy Kent. Everybody on the last call said he was their favorite character. They loved Kent as a character. Did you guys have a favorite character in the story besides your own?
I love India. I think she's awesome, and yeah, getting to play Clayton was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Clayton, actually. I really liked the dynamic that formed there. But then, of course, Kent, just completely, utterly fell in love with Kent. And I suppose it's because I'm seeing it through India's eyes, and in most scenes she's taking on a mothering role to him, so she wants to be there to protect him. So I think the minute I saw him, I just felt very protective and instantly just wanted everything to be okay for him. So yeah,
India's my favorite. She's just fascinating. Just a real kind of, my goodness, the trauma that she's been through, and just fascinating. But also the subsidiary, all the little kind of other characters who pop up with their little villainous schemes left, right, and center. They're fantastic. Gives so much light and color.
Well, and the thing is, there's so many villains in our life, you know what I mean? And whether they mean to be like, where they're really menacing villains, or they're just people who come in and cause problems. I mean, she's on a ship of 400 men, right? There's 3 women on this ship. So, I mean, and just because you're a sailor doesn't mean you're like the nicest guy, right? Although we know Merrick promises her that nothing will ever happen to her on the ship, right? But her worst nightmare is kind of living through. She just got off this horrible pirate ship, essentially, and she's dropped into the middle of a ship of 400 men. So it's kind of and Kent, Merrick very smartly says, I'm going to stick Kent with her, and give her something to keep her focused. If you think about it, it's kind of a very non-menacing person in her life. And so I don't have any children. So when I was writing Kent, I used my next door neighbor, and I just watched him go about his business. And I was like, okay, what does he do and how does he act? And he really became Kent. So he's a fun character. He was fun to write. And he was a nice comic relief a little bit in the story, because there's a lot of heavy components of the story, essentially. So
having seen so much of India's very dark narrative throughout this book, along with the lightness and the humor that other characters bring in, when we meet Kent, I instantly thought, well, there's just a reminder that all of those men that have done those horrible things to her did start out as Kent, did start out as very sweet little boys who have just been put in a society that gives them permission to act the way that they have towards women, towards India. And I think Kent's just a very strong reminder that we aren't born with any kind of evilness in us. And we are all blue-eyed and, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and innocent in our youth. And then it's just the way that we are shaped as we step into adulthood and the decisions that we make that can turn us into the goodies or the baddies.
Well, and Kent occurs, if Nicholas, I don't know if you remember, you might not, but Kent was in The Traitor. He was in the background with Merrick in The Traitor. We just see his name mentioned a couple times.
Yeah.
So we know that that character actually is going to carry forward in the story. We just don't know necessarily. So no character I do doesn't appear again. Even Lieutenant Gates comes back eventually too, because I'm not that much of a mastermind. It's just more of where Merrick goes, these people would be. You just don't realize it. So I'm kind of hiding that.
Parks too, I hope. I love the friction between Parks and Merrick. Great fun.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people hated that character when they read it. They're like, oh, I don't like him because he's trouble. But he makes sense in the face of what's gone on in the story, right? He was a midshipman. He was an officer too. He's been supplanted by someone else, and someone who technically, because there's a lot of rules on a ship, as you guys learn, right? There's basically a caste system essentially. And to go from the, the non-officers into the officers, as hard as it is, and then to rise amongst the officers is even harder. I really base that journey on Admiral Lord Nelson. So I don't know how interested or how much you know about him. Every girl's got a military hero, I guess, maybe, and mine would be Admiral Lord Nelson. I just love him as a character on the page, as well as a real historical character. And his rise was very similar to how Merrick's was. He actually spent 3 years on a ship where he didn't actually touch land at one point. So I really loved that journey and tried to build that into the story a little bit, because I think it, but that friction between him as Parks is based on some of, the way that whole system works, right, on a ship. So I do have some other questions. So these are directed. I'm going to direct these around at everybody. So everyone's going to get a different question. Nicholas, I've got one for you. So you already answered one. Did you know anything about sailing on ships? Have you ever done anything with ships before? Is this your first ship trip?
Well, you may or may not know, but I live down on the south coast of the United Kingdom, down in a little town called Shoreham by Sea, which has a great kind of maritime tradition. It's where Charles II made his escape to France. When he was a lot younger, before he came back for the Restoration. But for me, my closest experience with sailing is my hobby is kite surfing, and that there are no technical terms. There are a few technical terms, but mostly it's oh shit. That's the one that I use mostly. But I've had a little experience of sailing as well down in the southwest in Devon, but when I was a lot younger. And also several years ago, I read a series of books. Oh gosh, now I'm going to have to reach into my bottomless drawer of lost memories for the name of the author and the name of the books. But they were 19th century naval histories, sort of adventure books, a bit like Hornblower, but different. It'll come to me at some other point. I can't remember. Have a look on Audible, you'll find them. So yeah, it's. I mean, the sea is definitely a subject that's close to my heart. So,
was there anything that Merrick did that you disagreed with in this story, or that you some of the decisions he made where you were like, I don't know that I would have done that?
I mean, from my perspective, I'm a lover, not a fighter. There's an awful lot of blood that gets spilled. I'm kind of like, oh, do you have to? Can't we just sit down, have a cup of tea, and talk things over? But that really wouldn't make for great drama, would it?
No, and that was the side of his character, which he admits at the opening of the story. He's like, I'm a man of war, and I'm very good at it. He almost embraces the fact of his character that he has this. While he's a loving, kind individual, he's also a fighter. He's definitely a lover and a fighter, per se, than a lover, not a fighter.
It's in his contract, he's read the small print, but yeah, absolutely. And he's a terrific hero. He's great, in that respect. And it's great. You root for him. So
yeah. And when I wrote him, it was like, I looked at him and I'm like, well, as a sea captain, you have a tough job, right? You kind of have to go to places you may not want to. And we see him go to places where you're like, ooh, he made some decisions where you're like, ugh, I don't know that I would have done that. But,
it's such a hard job. It's such a hard job. He's got to, feel that the decisions that he makes are ones that will be supported by his crew, because he's out on a ledge, and if he makes the wrong decisions and ends up with a mutiny on his hands, it's game over. So there's that. He's not just got to fight the enemy, he's got to kind of fight his own crew to keep them in line, and it's a tough job.
Yeah, and he's certainly in this weird spot too, where this woman is now on his ship and they have this mystery that they're trying to unravel. And there's a lot of people questioning him on all ends because of just the predicament they've all been put in, and then we find out the family dynamic that plays into this later too. He's trying to hide some of his own history too, from everybody as well. So yeah, so I was curious. I didn't.
All the while, all of his incredible kind of focus is getting just blown apart by this incredible woman who's appeared, fallen into his life.
Yeah, let's just not forget that he's kind of fallen head over heels from the moment he sees her, and we see kind of the cracks in him because he's never really had to think about women, right? He starts on a ship when he's 12 years old, and he has no sense of being, in the company of a woman.
He's married to the sea, he's married to the ship. The Boudica is his queen, and all of a sudden somebody else comes in, the Empress of India.
Right, exactly. So I'm going to turn one over to Kathryn. So we did talk about this character, but now that when I talked to you originally, you were just getting started, and now that you've kind of finished, what did you learn new about her? Like as we moved along from when we initially talked to when you got to the end of the story, was there anything that was really new that you didn't expect, or that she did that you didn't expect?
I mean, I certainly wasn't expecting her to break quite so many laws in her pursuit of independence and trying to readdress the imbalance in her life. I knew that she'd be contrary. I knew that she would stand up for herself when she starts to find that strength. But I certainly wasn't expecting her to be setting things on fire. And I don't want to give too much away, but safe to say she does more than just be unladylike. I think we see a lot of heroines in historical dramas who upset the status quo by being very modern women with a modern mindset, which is scandalous to a sort of historical context, to a historical society. But I feel like you could put India into the modern day and she would still be scandalous in the way that she goes about achieving the things that she wants. She's almost too modern for the time period, and fits perfectly in the modern day as much as she does in the era that she's based in.
You know, when I wrote her, I often like to think that women go through a lot, right? Historically, I kind of want to believe that our foremothers, like they were doing stuff behind their men's back, right? Like this was going on for real. Like they didn't know, guys are going about their business. Yeah, she won't do that. I gotta worry about her. While they're secretly kind of like running the world on the other end. You know what I mean? And so I wanted it to be this component of her, you know, like being very a woman of her time, but also the idea that maybe, you know, there were people who came up with, you know, the suffragettes, they were ahead of their time. You know, I mean, when we look historically at women, these were women pushing boundaries. Even when we look at, you know, like the Roaring 20s, when it's shortening their skirts and, you know, being a little scandalous, and then we went back to longer skirts and bobby socks and all those things. There were women pushing the mark even back then. We're slow to catch up. But this tells me historically that these things probably were going on, that people were pushing the boundaries. And so I like to think of India as being a woman who got dropped in a really bad situation. And she's like, I'm going to play like the men do because I've got to survive now, you know, and that's kind of how I like to look at her, as being, of all my heroines, she's the most corrupt. She's definitely she's almost more of a pirate than Merrick, essentially kind of has that component to him. But he has a lot more like rules and regulations being, I look at her as being almost the pirate a bit of the story. She's learned to kind of exist in this world. And we see him later in the saga further exasperated and further in love with her as he moves forward. You know, she's always a step ahead of him, you know, doing things and stuff.
Yeah. Well, Merrick's idea of doing a good job is pure efficiency and leadership through following the rules. Whereas Caroline's someone who has followed the rules that society's given her all her life and has had nothing to show for it. She doesn't get a career, she doesn't get respect, she doesn't get love. She follows by the rules just as Merrick does, and he gets to be captain and she gets raped. It's the complete opposites of what life gives them as a result of following those rules. So by the time we as an audience meet Caroline, she's at a point where the rules don't matter to her anymore.
Yeah. So Jason, I'm going to direct you some historical questions because you're like this is like your historical foray over there. When you were presented with the idea of doing a historical, and certainly one like this one, you know, what were your thoughts about that being, you know, not being your primary genre? Although I know, like I said, you do a decent amount of books, but certainly not really having a big historical background.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of my books are these, you know, modern romance books, and so I've sort of slipped into a groove of how to deliver that kind of thing, you know, that sort of smoldering, whatever. And knowing that I was going into this historical, but also a historical that was based around, you know, sort of like espionage and military, and it wasn't this just a story about two people falling in love. It had all this entire massive scope around it. I knew that I wasn't just going to be able to fall back on, you know, my usual sort of approach. So yeah, I just read the text and figured out the givens and tried to play the character and tried to play the scene. And one thing I did sort of struggle with in prep is that a big gap in my education is understanding how Americans spoke in the 1700s. So for characters like George Allen, I wanted to separate the sound from characters like Clayton, so I didn't want to add any sort of British English accent to him. But I was like, oh, I'll just be an American man. That's in the notes, and that's as far as I understand, that's how they spoke. But I had to do a little bit of more prep to kind of get the feel of how people spoke at the time. But yeah, I just wanted to play the character and let them serve their function.
So it's interesting about that. So there would have been a mix of accents technically because
Yeah.
of where people came from around the world. We know that New York City, especially in 1755, this is quite a bit before the American Revolutionary War, there would have been Dutch people, there would have been
Mhm.
people of German descent, there would have been British, there would have been a mixture. So it's really hard when I'm dealing with that to try to say accent specific unless I have a specific rule or where they're from. So that's kind of why I just say, just give me something American here, because it's hard to kind of play on that. And there's so many accents already in the story. I just didn't want like too much more for the listener, right? Like I wanted to make it easier, and
Yeah.
in this story, there's so much language and lingo and sailor language. And French, actually, John Hartley does a beautiful amount of French in this story. And so does Kathryn does some too, that I was like, okay, let's just make this real easy on the listener. But yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. Why, what would he have sounded like? And certainly there's a very formal way they would talk, but they were also informal too. That was part of coming over to the colonies, right?
Yeah.
They were kind of tossing away, some of the rules and regulations, which was one of the reasons I love writing American Revolutionary War is like, I don't have the Regency to deal with. Like, I don't have all those
Mhm.
rules to deal with. I get to toss those away and say, go Bridgerton, you can deal with that. Like, and again, the other parts of my story take place in upstate New York on the frontier, where there was literally nobody. You had fallen off the earth up there. So the rules of society really don't, unless you're a British officer, which, Nicholas plays, obviously, Merrick in those stories, a lot of those rules would have been completely, gone essentially. So I just tried to make it more listener friendly, essentially, when we made some of those decisions. So I thought that's interesting that you said that.
Yeah, no, it works, and it certainly suits the setting. And I think it's like a common thing when historical fiction approaches the American accent. It's become like, even if you're watching History Channel and someone's rereading a text from the 1700s, they just use contemporary American accent with a bit more of like a heightened tilt to it. But no, yeah, it makes perfect sense.
It's fascinating to wonder what it might really have been. I mean, there's theories that in Shakespeare's time, the English spoke something closer to what we know as modern American accents, general kind of American accents now.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
who's to know,
So Viviana, I know you had some of your own questions and we're running towards the end of our time. So I'm going to send it back over to you. Well, before I do that,
Yeah.
anybody have any questions for me they want to ask? Like anything at all? You can throw anything my way.
Oh,
Tough one.
yeah.
Insert evil laugh.
This is, I was gonna say, this is a shy group here. The last group, they were like, rah, 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 asking me all these
I have
questions.
a question.
They were the
I
villains.
have a question in the spirit of complete revelation. How do you go about writing your sex scenes, your love scenes? Where do you come from when it comes to that? When you get a steamy scene going, you've got to commit to it,
Right.
Yes.
There's a funny, so that everybody on the other call got to hear this. So I never listen to my sex scenes. I cannot listen to them. I am the shy, and it's not. So here's the really weird thing. Okay, so if there's such thing as method writing, I would say that I do that. So like when I write a character, I truly try to receive the muse, open up to the muse, and where the muse takes me, right? So a lot of times when I write sex scenes, and even when I write dialogue and everything, I'm so ingrained in the character that I'm not really thinking of myself as being in the moment, right? So I write them and then I edit them and then I throw them out there and I don't think about them anymore. It's like, bye-bye, you're gone. So, I mean, and I give them to my editor and I'm like, don't tell me your opinion. Just tell me what I need to fix and we'll move on. So it's really funny because in my previous books, I never thought about having to listen to them. Because I never expected my books to be narrated, much less to be in audio, none of those things. So the first book, The Tory, when I got it, and I've got Shane East in my ears with his very deep, smoky, smoldery voice reading my sex scene, I'm like, oh, like I got all red and I had to turn it off. And I like, every time I turned it on, I'm like, did I write that? I wrote that. And so I had to call Jock and go, Jock, you're gonna have to take this one for the team. I can't do it. So how do I know, right? And then, and so it's funny because, you know, she's like, well, this is kind of a really steamy scene. I'm like, I know, I don't want to listen to it. She's like, but you wrote it. So the truth is that it really comes from, so I write sex scenes to progress a story. So there's usually a lot of thought going on. It's not just like, you know, point A goes into point B and we've got, you know, some steamy sex. Like there's usually a lot of like other thoughts going on. Like they're making a decision. This is moving the character. It's progressing a moment in the story. So I have a lot of things I have to cover in a sex scene, not only the act and the experience of it, but taking the story forward within context of the book, right? So I literally like, that's usually the only thing I write. I usually rewrite them like a few times and then I put them out there, but it's like, I've got to get my head in that space. And I sit down and I'm like, okay, usually the scene starts out with all the action and then I paint it on like layers. So each time I go through an edit, I'm like, okay, I need to up the dialogue here. Okay, I need to up the storyline here. And then a lot of times I have a song going on in the background and I build to whatever that song is. So if the song is building, I'm actually trying to build the action with that song. So if you were to actually play the sex scene read out loud to that song, you should build match the song.
Wow.
So a good example of this in The Tory, that scene was written to by a song called So Cruel by U2. So if you were to play that song and you should read it with the tempo, it should build and follow the song. When I did the opening to Man of War, I wrote that to Spoon Man by Soundgarden. So the opening scene where he jumps down, you know, and he's fighting and goes onto the other ship. And I write it to that song and it should build to the rhythm of it as I wrote it. So it's complex. There's multiple layers to how I build them. But the funny thing is when I actually like am now out of the zone and I'm no longer in the character. So like a year later, when I'm hearing it narrated to me, I'm like,
It's so cute.
I want to commend these sex scenes, by the way. I really want to commend them because I think they're very beautifully written. It was the first sex scene I've ever done. I feel the need to point that out. So I was kind of nervous.
Oh, wow. So interestingly enough, the one in the hammock, which I won't reference what's happening, but the one in the hammock, we all know which one that one is. I love the song Africa by Toto. And I heard that song and it was like, I kept listening to it and going, I see, this is what I see. This is what I see. This is what I see. My husband got really tired of that song. It played nonstop.
How could you ever get tired of Africa by Toto?
I know.
Hear it on loop.
Classic.
Right. And we're listening to it on loop and I'm writing the scene to this and I'm like building it based on what creativity it gave me in the moment. So it's really interesting. I try to make them artistic when I write them, but also very passionate. But I'm also an extremely descriptive writer and a violent writer too. So I can't write a sex scene where the door is slammed shut. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't make sense with the way that I build my stories to just have like, okay, the door slammed shut and we know India and Merrick went behind it. Like I'm going to describe how people are going to die. I need to describe how they come together. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So, but I know I haven't gotten to the sex scene in this book yet. Danielle listened to it. She's like, oh my God, Tracy, I can't wait for you to listen. I'm like, no.
I'm just so excited to hear all of it together because the whole time I was just thinking, what's Nicholas doing? What's his performance going to be in this moment? How is he reading that?
In the hammock doing some research.
Nice. Yeah.
The things you do for work.
And here's the thing, you know, it's always weird when like people come back, they're like, wow, that was a really hot scene. And I'm like, oh, please don't tell me that. Please.
But they serve such a purpose, especially within this narrative, because the first few times that that Merrick and India are sort of showing each other that they're interested before they even hook up, it's when they've both drunk a bit too much and it's a little bit questionable and but it's kind of casual and kind of fun, but nothing really happens. And then any other sex scenes that happen later on, are, I like that you slow the pace down and you take your time with it, because it's not just a sex scene because sex scenes are steamy. It's a sex scene that comes in at just the right moment for these characters to discover something within themselves. And they go through a lot of change and realizations individually in that moment. It's more than just being a bit horny. Like,
I really struggle with talking about this.
But she said it briefly about how it progresses the story, and I love that you saw that, and you know as far as the listener and as a reader as you guys are.
Here's the thing, when I write them, I didn't know I was going to have narrators. So I wrote them with the idea that they were never going to be read out loud, right? Like, it's a different thing as an author, like when you're like, somebody I don't know is now officially reading my sex. You know what I mean? It's very, very, like I said, the first time I read, I heard Sheen, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know this man, and he's reading that. He must think, but he reads lots of stuff. You guys read lots of stuff. It's not a big deal, right? You're actors, but for me, it's a different experience.
So we have, I don't know if you've got it over at the States, but certainly in the UK, we have a literary award called the Bad Sex Awards. And I think you've very safely avoided it. So
Woo, thank you. That makes me. And it's interesting now that I have narrators. Oh, look, we have James.
Hello. Just popping in real quick to say hello to Captain Merrick, sir. It's a pleasure working with you.
The feeling's mutual, and I get below and start scrubbing.
Right, sir. At least you're not as bad as Captain Barrington, I'll give you that.
So for those of you who don't know James, this is James Cheatham. He is the voice of many of the sailors. He himself was a sailor too, as well, in the U.S. Navy. So happy Memorial Day, by the way, and
Yes,
one of our villains too, as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Just had to pop in, say a quick hello. Wish you all the best. I've actually got a hot, steamy hockey romance to get on board.
Hey.
So
Yeah.
We were
Take
just
care, and I
talking
will
about
catch you
hot
all
and steamy.
Yeah. Thank you, James.
Well then, cheers to all.
See
Take
you,
care.
man.
Bye.
Cheers, James.
The funny thing is that we were talking with the villains, and they all had like this, and it was James, I think, that came up with the concept, and in literally he has a really good evil laugh, and so he was villainous, and he's like, oh, you're having the heroes next weekend. Perhaps we should be bad and jump in. And I'm like, I love how you think.
Pure villainy.
Yes.
So Viv, it's your show. I send it back to you.
All right, thanks. So if you guys don't have any other questions for TJ, I do have a couple of some fun, little personal, but not too personal, kind of questions for you guys, if you're up for it. So when you're not working and doing all these awesome audiobooks and theater and all this other fun stuff that you guys do for jobs, when you're not working, what do you do for fun? Nicholas, you want to start?
Well, I have a little 2-year-old by the name of Elliot who has basically got my whole diary blocked out when I'm not working. And we have a lot of fun. For example, this weekend, it was my wife's 40th birthday, and we all went camping for a weekend in a field somewhere near Hastings, of the Battle of Hastings fame. And yeah, he just, it was his first time camping, first time on the canvas, and he just took it, absolutely loved it. So yeah, he's my fun.
Aw. Remember that when he starts giving you eye rolls and attitude at teenage years.
He's already doing it. He's already giving me eye roll.
Nice.
He's so cute.
Yeah. What about you, Kathryn?
I listen to a lot of music and I watch a lot of films predominantly. My past work was in the film industry, so I'm very cinema focused. I run a few film clubs, that sort of thing. It's similar to what we're doing here. Basically, you sink yourself into some sort of creative film or text, and then get a group of people together and just all discuss it until you're blue in the face. It's wonderful.
That sounds like fun.
It's great. Yeah.
Jason?
Yeah, I've been practicing guitar a lot lately. Kind of comes and goes. Yeah, I play a lot of music, and I actually, my apartment that I've lived in for the past year and a half, my girlfriend and I we live right around the corner from a movie theater. So what Kathryn was saying, I'm a huge movie fan. So we've been going to Saturday morning matinees every week and seeing something new. So it's been a great time. And then yeah, just riding my bike and exercising, I guess. Those are my hobbies.
And then we were talking about music and how TJ writes her sex scenes to music. I mean, we were talking about other reasons for the music, but I just had to bring that sex thing up again. I love you, TJ.
It just keeps coming back up.
But I think that as human beings, we love music, whether it's because of some form of emotion that it brings up in a memory that, comes back and you're going, ooh, I remember blah, blah, blah. But there's also that one song that it does not matter if you're in the car, in the shower, on aisle 9 of the grocery store, that when it pops up, you're either belting it out loud or you're doing some form of a shimmy, shimmy, dance to it. What is that song for you?
Motorhead, Ace of Spades.
That is a great song.
I went a few years ago. I was on Broadway with a Royal Shakespeare Company show, and at the end of the run, we spent 2 weeks in California, and included a little journey down the 101 down the 101 and back up the Pacific Coastal Highway. We stopped off in a little town called Watsonville and threw ourselves out of an airplane at 13,000 feet. And I edited the skydiving movie together, and it just with Ace of Spades was just the only music that could fit it, and that has a special place in my heart.
Yeah,
that is really cool.
And Kathryn, what about you? What's that song?
Probably Ring of Fire, Johnny Cash.
Oh, what a great song.
I can't not. As soon as it comes in, I can't not start singing, even though I can't sing. It's awful.
yeah.
Jason?
God Only Knows by the Beach Boys.
Oh, I love that one.
It's not really a dance. I guess it's not really a dancing song, but I like that. And then maybe like Bob O'Reilly by The Who. I'll probably like shout that out. But yeah.
I'm going to answer this one too. So my husband and I traveled to Iceland last year, and we loved it so much. We spent a lot of time there. But the song, the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin, and that's actually about Iceland. And when we were there, the Icelandic people, amazing time I spent there, but they're very proud of things that are about Iceland. And so I always loved that song and would shout it and scream it in my car, very loud. And when we got there, one of our tour guides is like, you do realize that this song was written about Iceland and when they were performing in Reykjavik. And so since then, it's even kind of more like dear to my heart. And my husband and I really fell in love with Iceland and are hoping to go back in another month and visit Reykjavik again. So
nice. Nice. You guys work with words all day long. What is your favorite word? Not to be confused with your favorite curse word, because that's the second part of this conversation. So your favorite word?
The one I always go back to, an acting teacher, like freshman year of college, they, it's part of some exercise, they had us think of what our favorite word was and then use it in some context. But the word I always go back to is nightingale. I really love that word.
Yeah. I love that word too, yeah.
I have a Nightingale song as my ringtone on my mobile.
Oh, nice.
I like this song. For me, I've got a bunch. I mean, I don't have a favorite word. I've got so many. I mean, everything from I can't even say it. From prestidigitation to blubber.
Kathryn?
I like serendipity.
Oh, I like that word.
There's something, it's a word that starts out quite formal and ends with something that just sounds a little bit fun and a little bit cute, and it almost inspires something to do with serendipity within itself.
Yeah.
As a historic writer, I love the word clandestine. Like, I think there's so much that provides, like, you think like a dark room, candlelight behind a curtain. I don't know, but I love the word clandestine. Like, I just, whenever, I don't use it a lot, but when I use it, I'm like, boom, there you go. Have that.
That's one of those words that I always struggle with. I look at it and I go, is it clandestine? Clandestine?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody says it different. Well, and I have a Midwestern, Michigan, Canadian sort of accent. So like, I know that when I say it, I'm killing my vowels. Like everything I say, I'm really hard on my vowels. So, so if you say it, you're probably saying it right.
True. Yeah. So now, favorite curse word.
I'm a big fan of God damn it. The way it starts kind of like imploded and then damn it kind of helps launch it forward. I like it a lot.
Mine's shit.
All the obvious ones.
Yeah.
I'm like shit. And mine is shit because usually I'm deep in shit right about now. The self-deprecation of shit. I love shit. That's my favorite one.
I have one. The ones that escape me, even though it's maybe not my favorite, it's one that comes out of me most often when things don't go my way. If I'm trying to, I don't know, fix something or screw something on and the screwdriver slips, it's shit the bed.
Shit the bed. Nice.
It's a new one.
I say fuck too much.
Yeah.
It's lost its potency. I gotta be honest.
It's completely lost its potency to me as well. It's not a word that has any kind of power anymore at all.
I've got to vote for arse biscuits. That's a really good one too.
That's a new one.
That's a new one.
Or using the word ass as an adjective. Or like, oh, that was ass. Like
No, yeah.
I've never heard it that way. I've
Me
never
neither,
heard that
this is
before.
an ass song right now. Yeah, like I don't know. Just
I don't know.
Yeah, what I love, fuck, I will go into bloody hell, just to kind of get that, because like you guys were saying, fuck has kind of like lost that potency to it. It's one of those now you can kind of use it as a, which I love, noun, verb, adjective, and it could be like fuck or like fuck, and
I was privileged to drop the C-bomb on Radio 3 many years ago. Poem by John Wilmot, the Earl of Rochester, who wrote some of the rudest 18th century poem, I think it was 18th century poetry you'll ever have heard. But yeah, dropping the C-bomb about 3 or 4 times on Radio 3 was
nice.
But it's different in Great Britain than it is over here.
Yeah.
Like you guys use it way more than we do.
right.
That's why I didn't say it,
there's something else, which is the American accent. This is my personal taste, but when the Americans say fuck, it's amazing. But they can't say cunt.
Right.
British, you can say cunt better than anyone else. And especially with an accent,
Yeah.
It has a different feeling about it.
Yeah. But similar to the fuck, it used to be like bitch was like the really way to kind of like use that word, but now it becomes like bitch, look at this, so people kind of use it now. So I
my bitches.
Yeah, exactly. So I've used the C word when I'm like fucking God. Because it's one of those. Yeah.
I don't use that word, and I'm like a chicken around that word. When I start to feel it coming out, I'm like,
I think as a woman,
Yay! This is not a PG rated, if that's even a thing anymore, podcast. No. I mean, my book is far from it. I know the best is like when my family members ask me, like, can I read one of your books? Like, what do you think? I'm like, okay. I just got to tell you, you got to be ready for a few things.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, and also depending on your upbringing and everything else, I mean, fill in the blanks of the rationales. I mean, I didn't curse until I was in high school and never around my mother, so it's just one of those things that, it could be used so poetically and so raunchy at the same time. And then people get creative, like, like saying something, ass. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we go, tell us what you guys are currently working on and what's coming up next for you that you can share.
I'm currently working. I'm very lucky boy. I've got a partner TV series over here called Endeavour, which is the Inspector Morse prequel series. This is the 9th season, the final season.
So exciting!
And I'm playing a lovely chap called John Graham Scott, aka Jack, the man with 4 names, who plays the viola, and having a great time working with Sean Evans, who plays Endeavour Morse.
We've been looking at all your pictures you've been posting on Facebook. We're all like, oh my God, it's It's amazing. Good for you.
Thank you.
I've got some video games coming out, but they're all under NDAs, so I can't talk about anything.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
Of our existence.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I always tell when I have the conversation, because I signed a bunch of NDAs as well, but I always like saying like, okay, well, I'm going to be a vampire, and then there's a cowboy, and then there's a good guy, and then a questionable guy.
Okay. For context, I'm going to be a villain, and then I'm going to be a villain, and then I'm going to be a villain.
Ooh.
I see a
That's
pattern
just
here.
the way it goes. Yeah.
Well, when you're good at it, but you're so sweet,
I'm adorable. I'm an absolute delight, and yet people seem to think they just want to cast me.
It's part of that sexy,
horrific
raspy
women.
voice that you have, I think.
She says it with such conviction. She's like, I'm very sweet.
Yeah. What about you, Jason?
I have apart from audiobooks, I have a podcast I'm doing on Friday, June 3rd at noon Eastern Standard Time with Kaylee Loring about her book, Good Vibrations. So that'll be out soon, I hope.
Yeah, their turnaround time for their episodes are really quick, so it's good.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, from my perspective, The Rebel is about to come out in physical book this fall. And then next spring will be the Turncoats audio. So more to come there, as well as The Raider, the second book in the Alexi series, and then part of the saga. And then the Rebel audio will be coming out probably by December of next year. So I've got 2 more audiobooks coming out and 2 more physical books coming out. So
Yay.
yeah,
I love goodies. I love oral goodies. So
thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes. Well, thank you, Nicholas, Kathryn, and TJ, and Jason, as well as the villains that popped in for some of the fun for this year's Audiobook Lovin Series. Everyone, thank you for hanging out with us today, and we hope you've enjoyed this interview and chat, as well as the series. Make sure to follow on social media. We'll get everybody's links so you guys don't have to go hunting, and that will be in the main landing page of the Audiobook Lovin Series over at Viviana, Enchantress of Books. And until next time, happy listening.
Thank you for joining us in the Audiobook Lovin Series, hosted by Viviana, Enchantress of Books. We hope you have enjoyed this episode, as well as the series. We've included audio samples of our guests' work within the post for you to check out. Please make sure to visit the main page, link within the post, to learn more about the series, the authors, and the narrators. Please consider leaving a review wherever you listen to the series if you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to follow us on our social media platforms and subscribe to the Viviana Enchantress of Books newsletter. Until next time, happy listening. Audiobook Lovin hopes you've enjoyed this program.